Ray Dalio is the founder and co-chairman of Bridgewater Associates, which over the last 40 years has become the world's largest and best performing hedge fund. Bridgewater manages about $160 billion in global assets. He is also the author of a new book, Principles, which lays out the reasons why he and his firm have been as successful as they have, with the hope that he can help others achieve their potential. Ray, it is great to have you on the program.
It's a thrill to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we know that this program is somewhat special to you because you appeared with Louis Rukeyser 35 years ago on Wall Street Week. Let's take a look at that. Here's a clip.
You were recently quoted in an article as saying that you gave your view on the economy, and then you said, "I can say this with absolute certainty because I know how markets work." Now, I've heard that from other people before, and eventually they were buried, because it's a very inflexible statement. Why do you say this?
No, as a trader, I can't.
I know you're a trader and you're flexible there, but why in your forecast?
No, I can say with absolute certainty that if you look at the liquidity base in the corporations and the world as a whole, that there's such a reduced level of liquidity that you can't return to an era of stagflation. In other words, enough liquidity, an injection, a large enough injection of liquidity to avoid an economic tumble is also enough to cause much higher levels of inflation. It's a matter of dollars and cents.
You said that experience was a life changer. Tell me.
It was probably one of the most important experiences in my life because I was exactly wrong. You know, you look at that and I was so arrogant. Up until that point, you know, I had calculated that Mexico and other countries couldn't pay their debts and we would have a debt crisis. And that was controversial. And in August 1982, Mexico defaulted on its debts. More money, that 250% of banks' capital was out in loans to emerging countries. Wow. They defaulted on their debts. At that moment, I thought we were headed for a collapse. That was the exact bottom in the stock market, one of the greatest bull markets of any time. And right after that, I had to let go people who I love. This is 8 years after I started Bridgewater.
Wow.
I was so broke that I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad in order to pay for my family bills. And yet, so it was one of the most painful experiences of my life. And as a result of that, it also was one of the most beneficial experiences of my life because it changed my attitude from being confident and thinking I'm right, to asking myself, how do I know I'm right? And it made me want to have an idea meritocracy. It changed the way I made decision making so that I raised my probabilities of being right by having independent thinkers who would operate. And so it's explained in the book.
Right.
From that point forward, we understood how to be successful because it gave me the humility that I need to balance with my audacity. It was the best moment of my life, but also one of the most painful.
That is incredible. And what you just said was, you know, you went broke. You had to borrow money from family. How did you battle back? Take us back to that moment in time. You're down and out. You need to borrow money. You recognize things have changed around you. It's not what you thought. How do you come back from that?
Well, pause. I paused, and I was at a point of having to make a decision. Would I go have a job on Wall Street? Would I go get that? Or would I continue on with going after my goals? So I had to have very deep reflections. What would I do differently in order to move forward? And so there were three things that I did differently. First, I wanted to get the best people who disagreed with me and to have quality, thoughtful disagreement to see if I was missing anything, because I was fearing being wrong. The fearing being wrong led me to find ways of improving my chances of being right by properly triangulating with others. The second thing is that I understood diversification. In other words, I wanted to make big returns, but I couldn't have those big risks. So I had to figure out how to do that. And I understood how to balance risks better without reducing my returns. That's how we do it as explained in the book. And then the third thing is that I learned that many things that surprised me just surprised me because they hadn't happened in my lifetime before, but they happened before. So it made me study those, what happened in the past. And it led me to write down rules, principles. So one of the most powerful things that I did as a result of that was every time I would make a decision, I would write down the criteria for making the decision. And I could take those criteria and I could take them back in history and I could run them 100 years in different countries and see how they would have worked. That was powerful. Writing down those principles and then getting in sync with others of whether they were good principles and refining them over time. Not only did it then let us build our algorithms around that. In other words, when you put those principles in words, you can also convert them to algorithms, which then have been invaluable in our decision making. It also let us have an idea meritocracy because we could agree on the criteria of having of those for our making decisions.